Hi, I'm Dante.
And I'm Tommy.
And you're listening to Twigging Onto Twig, a podcast where we talk about Wildbow's most radical web serial, Twig.
In today's episode, this is a bit of a special episode, we cover Taking Route 1.x, Enemy. We do a quick review of the entire arc, and most importantly, we have guests. So Dante, who are our guests?
Yeah, so this episode is performing double duty. Partly, it's an episode of Twigging Onto Twig, and partly it's the third meeting of the Ottawa Wildbow fan meetup group. That's right, we've got the whole gang here. Sophie and Jacob, welcome to the show.
Salutations.
Hello. Thank you for bringing me on.
Well, thank you guys for coming on.
Yeah, so Jacob, I understand you've read all of Twig already.
Yes.
So you're going to have to be careful to keep your spoilers to yourself.
I made a bunch of notes about things that I'm not allowed to talk about that happen later, and I will hold my tongue when you guys speculate. Yes, I think Twig is my favorite.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I remember you mentioning that at our at the first meetup, that Twig is the one that you like the most, which I thought interesting because I don't think it's an opinion I've heard a lot.
No, I liked it. The character work, I think, is some of his best. I've been reading Pale up till now. Following along with that, and that's really good. But Twig just it pulls at the heartstrings in a very nice way.
Is it the first one that you read?
No, I read Worm first when I was a nerd back in high school, and then when I was a nerd in university, I read Twig.
Gotcha.
And Sophie, you were there when we came up with the idea for this podcast. So in a way, you're sort of an honorary co-founder. How does it feel being honorary co-founder of the world's most popular podcast about Twig?
Oh, well, honestly, I just love that I had to do very little work. I was there, I witnessed it, and, it formed without, me having to put in a lot of work. So, that's cool. Yeah, I've read all of Wildbow's works except Twig, so I'm pretty much only caught up to Enemy, and I haven't read anything past that. I've tried to pick it up in the past, and, I could never get past the first chapter, but I did really enjoy it this time around, when I was like, okay, I guess I have to actually read this. And it's like, yeah, it's good.
You think you're going to continue on from here?
I will probably continue on as need be if you ask me to come back on the podcast, because I'm very busy, and deadlines really help me for actually getting things done.
So to make sure you read Twig, we have to bring you in on the last episode.
That might be a lot to ask.
Well, we can break it up. You got to come in at the end of chapter 10, at the end of... I don't remember how many chapters there are. At the end of chapter 20, at the end of chapter 30.
Arcs? Yep.
I think my overarching Twig reading arc should just be reading it at the end of each arc.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say, though, that you bounced off the first chapter a couple times, and because I know I did too the first time I tried reading Twig, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are as to why. Just since we're talking about the arc overall, what pushed you away initially?
I think honestly, so while I was reading it, one of the things I noticed is how Wildbow really has a tendency to do bottom up description. That he'll describe the monsters by its claws, by all its features before getting to the overarching thing. And if you just look at all his work, that's just this little thing of you'll start an interlude and you don't know who's the narrator. You're just being fed little tidbits of details before you get that full image. And that can be really interesting when you're invested to just try and puzzle things out. That it requires a lot of reader effort to really get that full picture. But when you're not invested, it's a lot to ask for someone. It's so. Yeah. I think that was mostly it. That it was going of it's okay, there are these things that's happening, and I don't really have context to understand and appreciate them, and I don't have the investment to care.
That's an interesting point, and not one that I think I thought about or articulated, but I think that might also be why I bounced off the first couple times.
No, I mean, I also bounced off Twig the first time I looked at it. It was I don't know what's going on here. The little blurb at the start doesn't give you as much information to latch on as, oh, it's superpowers, but with bugs. being like, oh, the year is 1820 or 1921, almost a century since they've unraveled the underpinnings of life. It's like, okay, well, that's kind of cool, but that could just mean that this is a biology textbook and they figured out, evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, as you were saying, Sophie, the build up, or the way he kind of builds things up, takes you a little bit to get it. The sense you're like, all right, this is actually interesting, and you got to decide that you're willing to put in the time to get to that point of interest.
This is super interesting to me because I didn't bounce off it, and I was very interested in finding out what was going on. So I can see how that sort of bottom up description might, be a bit of a barrier if you're not coming into it invested. But like, this is not a perspective that I had or was familiar with, so it's super fascinating for me.
For me, I think part of it also was that I came into it right after finishing, I think, Pact. So, you're going in with this high stakes, high pace thing, and then expecting something similar, just because it's Wildbow's similar style of writing, similar structure, and it's much slower immediately. So, probably would not have bounced off had there been a bit more of a break between reading different things. But you know how it is. You're finished a thing, you're like, oh, what's next? What's the next thing I can read?
Yeah. No.
I think also, like, Wildbow, Twig is very novel of, like, a concept. That, like, I haven't really read that many things that are just so Frankensteinian in, like, their structure of, like, so, like, there is no, like, common ground thing that, like, I expect from it. Like, I can't go, like, oh, you read Worm, it's like, that's a superhero story. But, like, you don't really have the same subgenre of, this is a Frankenstein.
Like, yeah, historical fiction biopunk thing.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot more niche of a genre than the superheroes or urban fantasy.
I mean, it used to be very popular, but that was because that was just science fiction that was not historical fiction at the time. Like Frankenstein was like, oh yeah, like she wasn't writing
science
about
fiction.
And by the way, Frankenstein has a cell phone. No, it was just whatever that was, 1700s, 1800s.
I still need to read Frankenstein. Like, I'm just like reading Twig, and I'm thinking it's like, okay, I need to read Frankenstein. Especially it's like I spent like the last week going to the Fringe Festival, and there are 2 plays that are heavily inspired by Frankenstein. And it's like, oh, okay.
So you're enjoying all these things without the original context.
Right? And I'm just like going of like having a little bit of like shame of like, I haven't read this classic. There's a lot of classics out there. You can't read all of them, but it's just like the world is like clamoring. It's just like, you need to read Frankenstein.
Yep.
It's a sign.
Were you able to enjoy them despite, like, were they confusing without that context, or?
No, well, especially it's like everyone has the general like cliff notes of
That's
Frankenstein.
true.
So I haven't read it, but I do know the important things, and the 2 pieces were very different. One was called The Remembering, and it was very much this like dark, chilling spoken word story that's like dealing with like, okay, this person's like Victor Frankenstein, like creating life for that, but it's like honestly just dealing with the body horror of being trans, in that going of like, oh, my body doesn't feel like my body, like there's been different parts grafted on. And it's really just being used as a metaphor for that like body dysphoria. So it's this very chilling, powerful piece. Well, the other one was like Mary and Shelley and Lovelace Never Met, which is just a play where what if Mary Shelley and Ada Lovelace met? The founder of science fiction versus the first computer scientist, who were contemporaries.
Who were contemporaries and also like family, friends of friends sort of thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. So like Mary Shelley was close friends with Lord Byron, and Ada Lovelace was Lord Byron's daughter. And so like the show just kind of delves into their shared history, their shared legacies. It's very funny. The 2 plays are very different, but just the whole combination of it just kind of had me going of like, huh. And it's honestly one of the things when I was like reading today's chapter, like the enemy today, I kind of had a question of like, I wonder if it's an intentional choice that you have Percy and who created Mary. So you've got this family with Percy and Mary, because Percy was the name of Mary Shelley's husband. And this is a very Frankenstein-inspired work. And it's like, okay, is this a coincidence or is this an intentional choice?
It is almost certainly not a coincidence.
It's actually really funny that you say that, because we only realized that. I suppose I should say we only twigged onto that.
Yeah.
Like in the last episode, I'm trying to find out who it was who pointed that out to us.
And I am learning that right now.
I was like, they pointed it out. They're like,
how far into Twig
Percy
were you when you
Mary,
made this realization?
Like, how did we not notice that? But it's very clearly deliberate, I think.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Now that we've introduced our guests, do you want to get into the meat and fat of this episode?
I think that your continued insistence that only parts of our episode are meat and fat is
No, I think he wants us to dissect into the heart of it. Actually, one important question. Are we doing a dissection or a vivisection?
I think the chapter has been out long enough that its lifestyle has gone, and thus I think we're dissecting it.
A bit hard to vivisect at this point. That would be the Discord live read.
Yeah, I think so.
Or like the podcast covering Pale would be a vivisection, because that's still an
as
ongoing.
It comes out, yeah.
Well, that makes it even grimmer.
Very important distinction to make in our podcasting style.
I just feel that given like the biopunk theme, we should be precise and specific with our biological analogies.
Yes.
Yeah, nomenclature.
I would be very insistent on that if I had any biological knowledge whatsoever.
Meat and fat is a good start.
Some general thoughts before we jump into the plot. First of all, the audiobook for this chapter, Kim Dauber got a special guest to read it, Lauren Sherman, who I couldn't find any information about Lauren Sherman, like no other works read by him, or like, introducing like a professional reader or whatever. Like, I don't know who this person is, but he did a good job reading this chapter, and I was very happy with it. So
I'm curious whether that's a trend that'll continue throughout the interludes, having a guest reader.
I don't know, but when it happens, I'll call it out, because that's what we're here for, calling out interesting little things. Yep. The other important thing about this chapter was the name drop at the end. Percy is thinking about clones from ancient Greek, clone meaning twig. Now, Tommy, you've actually brought this up in the past in this podcast, that twig means clones, or clones means twig, or whatever. Did you know this before, or did you learn this from this particular sentence?
It's one of those facts that I had known in the past, and then I think I promptly forgot, but was still like there, because when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, I did know this.
Okay, because I had read, as we've mentioned before in this podcast, I've read about half of Twig in the past. So I've read this part, but I forgot completely. So then when you brought it up at the beginning of the podcast, I was like, oh, that's an interesting fact. That's very cool. And then I am reading this chapter. I'm like, wait a second. This has been in the book this whole time.
No, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's one of those facts that they tell you in like high school biology class, and then you kind of forget it, because what use as knowledge is that in everyday life?
Sure.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure when I mentioned that in the beginning, I'm pretty sure I had completely forgotten that it was mentioned in this chapter.
Yes. And you put another fact here in the notes,
which is one that I can't remember if I've mentioned before in this podcast, but the first mammal cloned, in our real world, was a lamb called Dolly. And, obviously we have the lambs, the Lambsbridge orphans.
I think we're just being like inundated with these like obvious in retrospect name things, the lambs, Percy and Mary. It's just like, it's so obvious once it's pointed out. And
It feels like it should be more glaring than it is.
Yeah, so just looking at like all the definitions for twig, I do find that like Wildbow just loves using like very polysemy for his like titles. That it's like it's one word, but it's all the different definitions.
Oh yeah,
very much so.
Because like when you think about it, like a twig is oftentimes like it's a part of a tree or anything that you can just easily remove. And when you think about the Lambsbridge orphans, that like the first chapter you establish what are their expiration dates. Like there's this idea that they are easily removed.
For sure.
We should have her on more often. She's pulling all these interesting things that we completely missed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna get more into the polysemy business later on with the arc title, because it's the end of an arc, and so we get to try and talk about what the arc title meant across the arc. But before we do that,
chapter summary.
Chapter summaries. Who wants to read the chapter summaries?
Oh, pick me.
All right, you can do one of them, and I'll do the previously on Twig part.
Sure, okay. Go for it.
So previously on Twig, Percy left, went off somewhere, and it wasn't said where, while the lambs and the bad seeds were fighting at Muthmont. And he left a note behind for Mary, saying that they can still be together, but Sai intercepted it and is not telling anyone. So then...
Right. And then in taking root 1.x, the meat and fat of the chapter, as it were, Percy is now walking around near the academy, keeping an eye out for Mary, musing about the academy. He's currently a free man, trying to stay that way. He sees a Stitch that is picking through the garbage, and he feels sorry for it. Specifically, he feels that he feels sorry that it's not properly maintained, and he wished that people took the time and care to invest in good quality work and a good quality Stitch. And he feels that that's kind of indicative of kind of the whole way people treat the Stitch and these biological workings and stuff. You get the sense that Percy really cares about quality here. Then, as he's thinking about this, he gets interrupted by Dog and Catcher, the academy police or paramilitary guard, whatever you want to call
them. Whatever they are.
Yeah, whatever they are. We'll figure it out. They show up. They start coming after him. He tries shielding himself by using the Stitch. They catch up to him. They get him. And he is only saved by the appearance of this acrid fog that blinds him, but also seems to be affecting Dog and Catcher. And as they struggle, someone else shows up who he initially thinks might be Mary who's come to rescue him. But he says, even as the fog blinds him, by the way the person is dragging him around, he realizes it's not Mary, it's someone else.
Mary wouldn't drag him by the bloody lip.
Yeah, was that specific line? Okay, yeah. And then he's taken by this other person to a safe location. She helps him clean out his eyes, exchanges some banter, and then introduces him to this group of other people. These people he still can't quite see, but he can hear the different voices, and his vision comes back. They're questioning him about his motives, about the work he's done, about his goals, his ambitions, his motivations. And when he's answered his questions about his work and what he wants to do with it to their satisfaction, they accept him, and they reveal that they too have ambitions against the academy, and they give him a place to stay, people to work with, academy techs, resources for making more clones or other projects, and they're like, all right, continue the fight. And I think that's where we end.
Mm-hmm.
With the name
drop. Yes, with that final title drop of clones from ancient Greek, clone, meaning twig.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff in this chapter.
It is pretty dense.
It's a big one.
Yeah. Like I said, it gives us a whole lot of context that not necessarily recontextualizes what we've read before necessarily, but adds on to what we've seen. And I think does a lot for the arc title here taking root by setting up and establishing this conspiracy that has taken root and is acting. And presumably, at some point, Sai and the lambs are going to stumble onto this conspiracy.
I know when I was speculating for what taking root could mean, I was also thinking of how, like, Sai is basically trying to recruit Mary, and so that, like, his thoughts and seeds that he's planting into her are taking root in her as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, you could argue that taking root was also what Percy was trying to do, trying to set up this network, this network of these sleeper cell clones.
Yeah.
Take root and infiltrate society, and well, that failed the first time around. Now that he's tied to this broader organization, maybe his
bad
plan,
seeds will take
root. Oh
root.
yeah, bad seeds taking root. His plan of the new method of warfare, the single clone infiltrating and then targeting and replacing children. Maybe we'll see that take root in later arc.
Do we want to have our full discussion on the arc title now?
I guess so.
Sure.
Yeah, because we were kind of talking earlier in, like, when we first started, we were kind of speculating on what it might come to mean, just based on the name itself. We were kind of thinking, like, this is the beginning of the story, and so the themes of the story are taking root in, like, the introductory chapters. The story, the setting, all of that.
Expectations.
We saw that these trees are really important in this setting. I don't know if we weren't really sure if that was just like a random thing or a this world type thing, but all of the buildings are held up by trees. So there's like that whole sort of like everything's rooted in this plant life. I kind of had this thought that, like, if you take it super literally, if somebody were to come up to a tree and like dig a little bit and cut off a root and run off with it, that's technically taking root. And so, but by doing that, you're kind of undermining the stability of the tree. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff here about like Percy undermining the institution of the academy. So
by cutting,
even though it's a very silly interpretation,
it's not though.
By cutting off the academy right at the roots, because they mention how
he's taking off the students.
The feeder school for the rich and powerful on the academy. So
absolutely. I think that's a good
the children.
A good take on the title as well.
Also, I feel like taking root has sort of like a double meaning. Of one, it like you can have like that beginning to sprout, that like you're just starting, but also it's like becoming fixed. That like if you have settled down your roots, then like you are kind of stuck there. And so like here we have this conflict with like the academy, which is like this establishment that is very fixed, that like its roots are deep and like it's hard to displace, though people are trying. And then, like, you've got the Lambsbridge orphans that are really just establishing themselves as a force to be reckoned with. So, like, they are establishing, taking root, like, recruiting Mary into their gang.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good thought. I guess we don't really need to talk about the title of this specific chapter. It's pretty self-evident.
Enemies.
Yeah, kind of.
If I could actually, let's say we do need to talk about that.
Okay, sounds good.
I think
let's finish
interesting.
talking about taking root first and then talk about enemies.
Okay. You have more to say about taking root?
I don't.
I've got a whole list here in the
script. Oh, wow.
So, in math, we have this idea of taking roots of an equation.
Square root, yeah.
Yeah, like you could take a square root of a number, but you could take, like, if you have like a polynomial equation, the roots are the ones where the value is 0. So you take the roots to find out what those values are, kind of break it down into its components. So there's a lot of breaking down into components and bringing stuff down to 0, I think.
And also, if you identify the roots, you are figuring out what the origin of something is. And so, like, you've got, these mysterious kids have appeared here. Where are they from? They're from the academy, but, like, where is, like, Mary from? So, like, just tracking down those roots.
Yep. And then we done couple of discussions in the past about like etymology of certain words, trying to figure out where they come from, what they mean. And it occurs to me that if you take the root of a word, in like I think it's, in Latin, radical is its root comes from the word for a root. And the idea of radical as sort of like this revolutionary thing and the rebellion against an establishment.
A grassroots revolution?
Yeah, exactly. I said at the beginning, like, for Twig, Wildbow's most radical work, to try and hint at this, like, this is a punk work. It's a rail against the establishment work. It's radical. It's grassroots. Yeah. And one thing I think that's interesting is the name of the city and of the academy is Radom. Rad probably is that same word, radical, root, which I'm not sure, probably is a combination of all these ideas of like being deep-rooted establishment and whatever, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and Radom as a name just has that like old money cachet sound to it.
It does.
Also.
Yes, I am Brannigan Radom the Fourth.
Exactly.
My family invented the tea bag.
Welcome to my yacht.
My backup yacht. The other one is in storage for the winter. Yes. Radom is a very pompous.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so but I had some comments to make about Enemy.
Yeah, great.
That I thought was interesting. So for those listening who have read Wildbow's other works, he does like his interludes, dropping you into the head of a different character for a chapter. Jumps around a lot. So I thought it's interesting that the first interlude we get in Twig is not from the perspective of one of Sylvester's fellow lambs, not from the perspective of Mary or anyone associated with the Lambs Project. No, it's from their foe, from their enemy. And this isn't spoiling anything. If you just look through the table of contents, you can just see that when they put in interlude chapters, most of them are enemy chapters. They're all 2.x and 3.x. So I think it's kind of it sets up an interesting structure. If you just kind of look through the table of contents of the book, you're like, oh, we're going to be getting a lot of perspectives from the other side here. Mm-hmm. And then or you could also like flip it around and be like, all right, 1.x enemy. Percy's enemy in this chapter is the academy itself. Yeah. He's fighting against Dog and Catcher, where he talks about his upbringing and being like a second-class student at the academy who could be kicked out at any time if a paying student shows up. And so the enemy in that sense is, this whole establishment is taking root. So it's like, all right, well, who's fighting? Who's the enemy of who you're rooting for? Which I'll get to more when we talk about.
Yeah, that's the
rebels.
Great read. Yeah, that's a interesting point. I want to call this out. The other day, Wildbow mentioned that his relationship to arc structure in Twig is very different from his other books. So I'm kind of looking for that right now. Mm-hmm. And you pointing that out, I think, is an aspect of that element. So just something I want to be looking forward to or looking for in future arcs. And Sophie, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, also, like, during the chapter, you have this idea of, like, it starts with this idea of overshoot, of, like, when a population overshoots itself, then it becomes, like, out of control. And so, like, when we're dealing with the concept of enemy, I just felt like the fact that these two concepts are being introduced at the same time was also just really interesting, because, like, he was, like, going of, like, oh, when, a civilization, like where a species no longer has predators, it overshoots. But you're establishing Percy as this predator taking control, like opposing the academy.
The bloated system that is the academy that has operated without any kind of account or audit or predator, as you say.
It needs an enemy, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that like he is making himself the predator against the academy. So like he's like saying like, oh, they don't have predators, but he's being awfully predatorial. So I just felt
Yep.
it was this really interesting juxtaposition of his words versus his actions.
Oh, definitely. That might even be completely deliberate on Percy's part. Like, I'm going to be the enemy. I'm going to be the predator because of this Overshoot business.
I had a very different take on Percy, his role in the system, but I think we should finish the plot discussion before we get on that.
Yeah. So in our plot discussion, one thing that I thought was very interesting was how, like, at the end of the previous chapter, when Mary is talking to Hale about Percy and this group that he's involved in, she seems to suggest that he's already working with them, that he has dealings with them. She says that he's been selling off spare children to people of similar ambitions, and that they're a group. And they do confirm that these are the people he's been selling the children to. They say, you sold them without a care as to what we were using them for. But he doesn't recognize them. He doesn't know Cynthia. He doesn't know this old man or the lady with the birds. He doesn't know them. And when he meets Cynthia, he says, you're with them, not you're with us. Percy is not part of this group until this chapter, which I thought was interesting and kind of surprising given what we were led to previously.
And presumably what Percy has let Mary and probably the other kids assume that he has backing from someone more powerful. It's not just this small operation running out of the back of his flat.
Well, Mary mentioned that Percy was trying to keep the existence of this group secret even from her. So
right.
So if she didn't know about it and just kind of picked up on it, like maybe this is just Mary being mistaken. Like she heard a bit about this group and didn't realize that Percy wasn't actually part of it. Or maybe Percy was like sort of deliberately dropping hints so that Mary would think that he was trying to keep it from her, but actually cluing her in. I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
The hidden nature of the group also just makes me think once again about roots, of how like something can have really deep roots that you can't see. Like it's not visible.
Yeah, that's a really good take.
And how deep does this conspiracy grow? Is this just like one cell, larger organization?
Yeah, because Percy, for all we know, could have, been operating on the periphery of a different aspect of this group, or just, working with a middleman between this group and, and sort of thinks that he's closer to it than he actually was until this point where his whole operation's blown up and they bring him in.
And we know that he's not, that they aren't letting him closer because they lied to him. They tell him that all the clones that he made are dead. They tell him that Mary, still very much alive, is dead. There's a little dramatic irony there.
See, that's interesting, because I thought they were just mistaken about that. I didn't realize.
Oh, I thought it was manipulation.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. We confirmed, the old man said, we confirmed for ourselves. 3 boys and a girl killed by the Academy said.
I feel if they were mistaken, the terminology there would be different. It'd be like, the Academy wouldn't keep them alive. But the deliberate act of we confirmed.
Yeah.
Does it sound like there's no ambiguity here? We know they're dead.
My read was definitely that they were lying to him. I could see, you could argue that they weren't sure, but no, it definitely feels like they are trying to keep him in the dark. So they don't fully trust him yet. They don't.
I don't know if it's a question of trust. To me, it was just more a question of they see that Percy has some degree of unhealthy, toxic care for Mary, at least. So telling him that she's dead is a way to get him more on board with the...
Yeah, to focus on the work they want him to do for them and not on going and rescuing his perfect clone Mary from
I'd have a similar read, that it's very much, it's clear that he's invested a lot into Mary, and so if he knew that she was still alive, then that would distract him from doing the work they want him to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting. You pointed out this idea of this kind of scope of the conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're kind of like at the end of the previous chapter, like this is kind of like fairly typical for the end of a story where like you realize that the big bad was actually part of a group of big bads.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of get that here, but like you said, this could be a pretty widespread conspiracy. Like maybe we'll find out at the end of this coming arc, like, oh, actually, this group of big bads was part of a network of groups of big bads.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, who knows how deep this goes.
Yeah.
And, we're calling them the big bads right now, but maybe they're the good guys. They're fighting against this horrible oppressive system, and they have all the best interests of the world at heart.
See, this is... I was making a note of this. Often when you see, like, a story that has, the oppressive evil empire and the plucky upstart rebels, they, at least at the start, try and paint the rebels as more upstanding, trying to use more high-handed methods, and then later in the story there's a whole moral dilemma of having to use the enemy's tools to fight against them and get more and more violent or extreme. But here, right from the start, our first introduction to this anti-academy movement is they buy
children.
Yeah, they traffic in children. They're cool with Percy selling off the children, building these clones, using those clones to murder families. Their methods don't really seem that different from what we've seen of the Academy at this point. The only difference is that they have less resources and less bureaucracy, basically. So
less institutional power.
Yeah, and the old man, the one who seems to be leading some of the discussion, he was a professor. And you look at Percy talking about the cutthroat academy politics. Lillian mentions it as well. To get to the point where you are a professor, I mean, getting tenure is hard enough in our world where you don't have to make biological war machines for your advancement. That the fact that this guy got out of the system means he had to get quite a bit of the way. He had to buy really heavily into the system before he pulled out. So I don't know if he's really made a clean break from the Academy's ideas. My read of the rebels is they don't really care about fixing the problems of the system. They just want to be the new people on top. And that might be too much to read into this chapter, but that would be my theory at this point here.
I don't think it's too much to read into this chapter at all. That's absolutely the vibe I was getting. If there is a rebel alliance to the empire, the Academy's empire, these are the Saw Gerrera types. For those of you who are watch Star Wars at all, they're the ones that are using the Empire's methods against them, rather than the idealistic, noble ones that we see in the original movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, like, talking about big bads, my first thought, it's the Academy. It's this uprooted institution that, we were established, we are introduced to Sai, who works for the Academy, but you always feel like he's doing this very begrudgingly. That it's just he wants to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Academy has not come off well in the first chapter.
No.
It is a scary organization.
Do we want to discuss themes?
We do want to discuss themes.
All right, so I'm just gonna talk about the main themes that immediately popped up to me, especially as I noticed that in Wildbow's works, it's the themes are really present early on in the story, that if you just dig for them, they're there. And so the first chapter, you have a person losing control of their creation. This guy has created a monster and he loses control and it turns on him. And then you're established to the Lambsbridge orphans, who are this creation of the Academy, and they're this plucky upstart. And the other theme is of how biological creatures want to survive, that there's this push and this need to survive, and you're just quickly established of how all the Lambsbridge have an expiry date of they're only supposed to last till they're 20 at best.
Yeah. And I would also like to point out we've been introduced to the resources the Academy uses to bring back wayward projects or things that have run away, Dog and Catcher, which to me all reads towards the Sai and the Lambs on the run, being chased, trying to get away from the Academy, being chased by Dog and Catcher.
Are you saying that the Lambs will go on the lam at some point?
Yes.
And Dog and Catcher themselves, well, I think dog. There's less description of catcher in this chapter.
Yeah.
But dog himself is described as a project that was started largely doomed to failure. They fixed it with crude, metal springs and harnesses, extra tubes to pump fluids, and then the Academy is happy that the project has these problems because a dog couldn't run unless without its regular drainage or a specialized diet. Actually, this line right here, the Academy had overshot. In this case, it had made effective use of that fact. So this whole, it's going past its overreaching in its ambitions, but unlike the snake catcher at the start of the story, who loses control of the story of the monster, gets eaten. The Academy, they've lost control of the biological processes, but they've just used that to reinforce their control over this creature and use it to control the rest of Radham, the rest of the experiments, the rogue scientists.
Did you use the word? Does the text use the word overshoot there or
Yep,
overshot?
Literally, the Academy had overshot, and
there must be deliberate use there because of overshoot versus an overshot.
No, it's definitely a coincidence. There's no.
That's Percy's thought process as he's looking at dog and catcher, and he's the one who first brings up Overshot that chapter.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that in this case, what it essentially is saying ties back to these two themes that Sophie mentioned, that the Academy is using deliberately the biological imperative of their failing creations to survive in order to maintain control of them.
Which is only something it can do because it has that institutional power. If it was, presumably, if the snake catcher had made dog at the beginning, dog would not have survived, would have eaten or, killed, and then would not have survived.
Yeah.
Speaking once more on the idea of something overshooting, that I'm thinking of how a plant can have shoots from it that go out of control, and of how you need to carefully prune it to keep it healthy. But also that brings up the idea of a twig. Yeah. That it's this twig that is being pruned, but it is also taking root.
Yeah. See, it all comes together.
And
now we're going to go in a deep dive onto apple grafting. You take it.
Oh, we've done that.
Did that already? Oh,
we did that already.
Okay.
But just to continue the metaphor a little bit, how does one herd lambs?
With wolves.
With the sheepdog and
with dogs. Yep.
Your shepherd, your dog and catcher.
Exactly.
Also, just going away from the themes for a bit, I saw in the notes someone just wants you guys to talk more about the fight. So can I say dog and catcher are pretty cool. This spring-loaded giant dog monster with
a guy.
Incredible. Oh yeah, a guy. They don't really describe catcher. He's just a big, strong guy. Is he an experiment?
I think he must be.
He's not. He's not Dog's handler.
That was something that I brought up later in the notes. Is that I wasn't sure if Catcher was actually a monster himself or just a handler. But the line isn't.
Oh no! Later on,
yeah.
Was Percy's fighting in the gas? Yeah, the gas had alarmed these two abominations so very much.
Yeah.
So Catcher himself is very strong, has good smell.
Yeah, in the Percy's thought process as they're fighting is if the stars aligned right, perhaps they could put down Catcher. And I'm pretty sure that's a lot of misdirection on other parts. That Catcher is just as dangerous, if not more so, than Dog. Dog finds you, and then Catcher takes care of you. It's not.
Oh yeah.
It's not Dog's job to do the fighting.
It's like when you're hunting with dogs, you'll have the pointer and you'll have the retriever.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have that, except just one of them is the dog.
And one of them's a trap that lures you in thinking you can take it, and then it catches you.
I think this is a good introduction to when the Academy is being less subtle, the lambs being kind of these infiltrators into the school. And here it's oh no, if they want to, they can track you down anywhere in the city and just grab you. And your human strength is not enough. Your best disguises and misdirections are not enough. No, this dog that runs on the roofs and see and smell you from anywhere is gonna hunt you down. It's like it's kind of a good demonstration of even this failed academy project. This can kind of jury rig together is still more than a match for the enemies of the system.
For any normal person, yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's futile to fight the academy.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression you get. But then they do distract him. With this mucus gas stuff. But I think it's mentioned in the chapter that they're like, all right, well, now that we've used this, they'll make it. Yeah, the academy will diagnose the problem, mend them in a day, and then they'll devise a means to prevent it. So it's like, all right, well, you win the battle, but you're not. It doesn't. You don't know if they're going to win the war.
Can't win the fight. Mm-hmm. They can't win the war. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that we had in the notes a note that people had asked us to talk more about the fights. That was Propaganda Pagoda responding to our last episode where we just kind of like glossed over a fight. We're like, fight scenes aren't interesting. But yeah, Propaganda Pagoda pointed out that actually, like the fight scenes often are telling something, and if we look for that, we might find it something interesting. And I think like what we've been seeing here is like this fight scene showing who these creatures are, what they're capable of, and what it's like to be fighting against the academy. Like
like a little show of hands, or like showing off their cards. The academy revealed a bit of what they have, what they're keeping.
And even showing how the academy thinks when it fights, or when it sends things out. It's overbearing presence, but it's also using trickery and misdirection.
Yeah. And it's not like, let's just send some people with, like, honestly, you could probably use a regular bloodhound and, like, people with guns to come track down Percy. But they send a superhuman man and a monster of a dog to hunt him down. And so there's this factor of intimidation.
I feel also it's, that's an expression, if the only tool you have is a hammer, all your problems look like nails. It's like if you have dog and catcher in your arsenal, why would you not use them?
Yeah, I guess so.
If all you have is monsters, everything looks like
prey.
Yeah. So I think we've come to the end of our plot discussion and
that was still the plot discussion.
And have like managed to get through a bunch of our world building monster corner discussion while we're at it.
Well, if we're doing that, if we're doing Monster
Corner, do we have anything more to say on Dog and Catcher?
Yes, I was about to say those things. That it's not just dog, it's a dog, which to me implied that this wasn't the first dog, or there's like a lineage of them, or there's like a kennel of dogs that get sent out. It's one of a group. It's not a unique.
You think this one is like a failed prototype? And there's better dogs out there?
Or it was a failed prototype originally, and it worked well enough that when it breaks down, because it does not sound like a very stable creation, they make a new one.
I didn't catch that idea of it being
just
a dog rather than just dog. But based on it being a failed experiment and falling apart, it wouldn't surprise me if there were.
You'd think they'd try again.
Yeah.
So like iterating dog prototype 15 sort of thing.
If this failed dog is already so successful at catching things, why wouldn't they reuse the work they've done?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they make a better dog that doesn't have to rely on regular maintenance, is that their Overshoot right there? And you've got this hunting dog that doesn't need the academy to fit.
And I mean, I think it's Hale points out in the previous, or I think that at some point, Sai points out that Hale points out, or that Hale doesn't like.
Wildbow points out that Sai points out.
We're pointing out that Wildbow pointed out that, but no, that the academy doesn't like throwing away things. If they can recycle and reuse in whatever way, they will. So, I think that's what we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything else to add about Dog and Catcher.
Failed projects that they're using.
Well, it sounds like, I think this is actually from next chapter, so I'm not going to talk about it.
Okay. You be quiet. You can talk again next time. On the subject of monster corners, one thing that I thought was interesting, the rain here, like we've talked about the rain in this setting quite a lot. it's kind of one of the staples of the setting, the plants and the rain. And it gets really brought up here, this idea that Radham is using algae in the water system and bacteria being catalyzed by fumes on the periphery of the city to create rain when they want it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they've even they're even doing weather control through monsters that they've created, essentially, which is really fun.
And considering one of the themes, as we talked about earlier, is the monster breaking loose, what happens when the rain goes wild?
Yeah. Did you guys, I don't remember it in your discussions, did you guys talk about why they were making it rain?
Yes, it was for, if I remember correctly, the vines, the buildings being held up by the trees and vines, I think.
Okay.
It's also...
it wouldn't surprise me if there were other more insidious reasons that we don't know yet. But
yeah.
It's also because rain is very atmospheric, and having a reason for rain to be there all the time.
Yeah. It's like, all right, here we go. Yeah. 1920s Vancouver.
Or 1920s London, which is...
Oh, yeah. That's famous for its rain, too.
Yeah, London, Ontario.
Fake London.
Fake London, yeah. Other monsters, we have the Stitched, and the whole discussion about how Stitched are not easy to make, but they're cheap because flesh is cheap.
And dead flesh is cheaper.
Flesh is cheap is probably, you can put that up in the themes too.
Yeah.
How with this world with how they've kind of, what's that quote from the start? They've unraveled the foundations of life. And then as a result, it gets treated so casually. Dead flesh, modified humans, whatever the hell dog is, and how they're playing with the weather. Percy talks
Dog
about,
a human?
Is he?
I thought
he's a four-legged monster.
No, it might have been a person who just kind of got strapped into this frame and bent into place.
I thought so. Let me reread this section. Dog was closer.
First and most obvious was a monster. Four-legged, it stood tall enough. Yeah, it had parts of a human face, writ large, features largely concealed by long black hair.
I think there's a human at the core of dog, I think.
Oh, you think it's easier to make a human with better strength and better nose than it is to make a dog that's smart? Yeah.
Well, if it has a human features...
Yeah.
I don't know.
But they might have just put that on there because it looks scary.
True.
Like, I definitely think dog and catcher have a big intimidation factor in their design. That's a deliberate thing they're doing.
I like how it says dog is one of the best known of the Academy's secret projects.
Yeah.
You don't want a best known secret.
Well, I don't know about that. I feel like it's like, you talk about these projects in like hushed whispers, because they're you're not supposed to know about them, but they still knowing
intimidation factor.
Keeps you in line. I'm sure the Academy has a lot of things they keep back for when dog and catcher aren't enough.
On the terrifying strong monsters, they overlook that the Academy could have
the lambs, for example.
Yeah.
Oh, again, misdirection. Okay.
Yeah. So that's Monster Corner. And we covered kind of some of the general stuff. In terms of historical and scientific references, I guess we've brought up Overshoot many times, and we should probably give that its own dedicated little conversation.
Yeah, I had a lot I'd like to say about Overshoot. If you don't
I would
mind.
like to hear it.
Okay.
Yeah, your notes are interesting.
And I made some more that's not even there. I have secret notes.
Oh.
Which is the best known of Jacob's secret notes?
The best known secret notes. Well, probably the ones I wrote down there. Overshoot, in our world, you guys mentioned, as we were doing the brainstorming for this, a lot of it is on human population overshoot. The idea of a population grows to exceed the carrying capacity of the environment. So the ability of the environmental resources, water, food production, to handle the population that lives there. And so this unsustainable consumption of resources from a larger population leads to environmental degradation. And then as you damage the land, the carrying capacity drops and the population ends up smaller and worse off than it was before it had exceeded this peak. Whereas if you reach the peak and stay there, you could keep going. But if you go past it, then you end up with 4. And this was brought up historically by, what's his name, Thomas Malthus in 1798, the Malthusian catastrophe. He has this essay on the principle of population. He talks about how at that time, the human population was kind of growing exponentially or in a geometric sequence, right? Every family can have more than 2 kids. Every one of those kids, a generation later, will have more than 2 kids. And the population keeps growing. But food production is dependent on the land. It's dependent on how much food you can grow in the land. So the land, other than the occasional volcanic eruption, you're not getting more land in the world. You can work more of it. You can cover more of Britain. That's what he's writing about. But eventually, the population is going to overshoot. You have to outstrip the carrying capacity of the land. And Malthus sees this as inevitably leading to famine, to mass poverty, and to just kind of like a large collapse in civilization. And this was taken pretty seriously by a lot of people at the time. They're like, oh, we need to do something about this. And other people strongly disagreed with his position. However, they're like, all right, well, you're just blaming the poor for the problems of, hey, things that could be solved better, family planning, population planning. Hey, maybe we look at a better way of growing food.
Tommy, I'm getting an alert here that's saying that there's your recording device isn't working as expected. Are you seeing anything like that?
Might just be a momentary dip. Is there a way to check the recording as it's happening?
No, we'd kind of have to stop and then continue, which I suppose we could do. Yeah, I'll do that just in case.
Testing.
Yeah.
Testing.
So we're talking about
Malthus. We're talking Thomas Malthus. So yeah, if you want to go back to...
Yeah, so back to Malthus. Because I remember in a long time ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth in my high school biology class, all of a shocking 7 years ago, we talked about population overshoot, and we also talked about this idea of a logistic function. The Malthus's model of population growth isn't the only way populations grow. You will note that our world today did not collapse in the way he had predicted.
Only in new, fun other ways.
Yeah, we are collapsing currently in new, fun other ways. I'll get to that. But yeah, so a lot of how we got around that was, 1, people had fewer children. 2, technologies, particularly agricultural technology, got much better with the invention of synthetic fertilizer, the tractor, in ways that you could suddenly ramp up food production to staggering extents. And now the world then of the late 1798 to now, our population is 10 times that, and still growing. So, but this logistic function is this other model of population growth where you say, okay, the rate of the population growing starts out as kind of like an exponential. You remember from high school math, just going up, doubling. And then as the resources available to it, the population starts to strain on the resources available to it in like a fixed environment. The rate of growth of the population slows down, and eventually plateaus. It flattens out. It reaches the carrying capacity of the environment. And the only way the population would grow past that stable state is if more resources become available. Whether that's they expanded, the population expands into a new environment. If there's like a change, like, I don't know, in the flood patterns of the rivers for like deer population, forests get cut down, there's more grasslands or something. And so this argument was actually, the logistic function was first made out in mathematics and then publicly stated in, I was reading up, 1820 as a response to Malthus. They're saying, it's like, hey, no, the population doesn't have to accelerate, keep growing, and then collapse. Populations don't have to do that. A lot of them don't do that. You see in a lot of natural environments that you have this balance of the ecosystems, the population. As the population of rabbits grows, I don't know, for you math guys, you probably did you would have done your differential equations. The classic example they use is rabbits and wolves, right? Mm-hmm. Or deers and wolves. And as the population of rabbits grows, then there's more prey for the wolves, so they eat more rabbits, and eventually the population can reach a stable dynamic of you might have rabbits grow one year, but then those extra rabbits get eaten by the wolves, and the wolves grow, and it balances out. And so bringing this back to Overshoot in our world and then into Twig, the fears of Overshoot in our world at the time of Thomas Malthus were overstated, I would say, and often it seemed like a way for the elites to kind of as a way to stoke fear in the population and to demonize the poor, who outnumbered them and were continuing to outnumber them. And it's like this is a way to impose harsher measures on them because we can't let this keep growing or else it'll lead to all of societal collapse. We're doing the best
for the greater good.
Yeah. And what Tommy was saying about modern Overshoot, this is a little bit more removed from Twig stuff, but modern Overshoot, we talk about that a lot. You hear talk about, the world is reaching its global carrying capacity, not just the British Isles and farmland there, but there are simply too many people to support, for the Earth to support it. And this topic shows up a lot. It's kind of like, well, I mean, I live in Canada. The resources I use as a wasteful Canadian are something like 20 to 100 times what someone in a developing country uses. So it's like, is that, yes, the world can't all live like me, or you guys, I presume, also in Ottawa, unless you are living on your own little sustainable farm plot and a passive house and everything. But there's that concept of, it's like, the world can't all live like me, but does that mean that the rest of the world should be pushed down, or does that mean that I need to scale back? And there's a lot of this talk about population overshoot historically and now is kind of used as a tool to kind of to keep populations down, to kind of be like, we have it better and we can't let everyone else have this. The environment can't handle it, so which means that society can't handle it.
But you can't expect me to give up my comfortable life.
But bringing this back into Twig, so that idea of population overshoot, I don't think that's really what Percy's talking about. He's talking about overreach of the academy growing its pushing its resources, its monster growth into crazier and crazier things until they go out of control. The idea of the class dynamic, I think it's probably going to come up in that Percy talks about being a lower class student. There's obviously a huge population of Radom that is not involved in the academy. Yeah. So that overshoot that comes up there, but the overshoot that Percy and these rebel groups are worried about seems to be of overshoot of ambition or of power. And then what I kind of wonder about, we talked about enemy. You brought up Percy being the enemy to the academy right at the start. The academy, it has no predators, so it keeps pushing itself further. But that doesn't really make sense. The idea of Percy thinking that the academy has no predators, so it keeps pushing itself for why would it do that? Why does it make weapons that it know if it doesn't have an enemy?
Because that's what they do.
Yeah, but
we can already see a lot of unrest in the academy.
Yeah, you can see that there's unrest in the academy. There's projects that lose control. There's these independent organizations building their own weapons, but they don't seem to be a match for the might of the academy as it is kind of talked about in hushed tone. So why push themselves to this point of overshoot to collapse when they don't seem threatened? Or if Percy and these rebels are we are going to solve the academy's overshoot by spurring them into an arms race as we build bigger weapons, so they send out bigger weapons. That seems very... I feel like Percy, going back to what I was saying about Percy and the rebels just not seeming like wanting to change the system, just end up on top of it. I really think all their talk about overshoot here is a load of bull. It definitely seems like what Percy thinks and what Percy says are very different things. I think it's
self-rationalization.
I think it's about he sees that there's a problem and he knows that there's a solution, but what he's doing is totally different. There's most of my thoughts on this.
No, that's a very interesting analysis, I do think there's something to be said for like institutional inertia. The Academy makes monsters because that's what the Academy does, and internally they all have to be constantly one-upping each other.
Yeah, and that kind of
for status,
ties into like our real world issues. There's a lot of things where it's like people look, it's like, okay, we need to cut back on resource consumption, but our governments, our economies are all optimized to keep growing. To keep pushing.
Yeah.
So even though people can be like, yeah, we don't actually need more stuff, we are going to keep doing it because that's what we do and because it's hard to change that. So yeah, I could see that argument for the Academy. So maybe Percy and the Rebels are the shock to the system to change that, but I don't think so.
I think the shock to the system is more likely to come from the Lamb Bridge gang.
Yeah.
Just because it's more narratively interesting, or
No, the lambs are just going to be operating on the periphery, watching things happen.
Yes, the lambs will have their little side adventures, and then once at the end of every chapter, we'll have Percy actually solving the problem in the enemy chapter.
This is what Wildbow meant when he said the architecture is unusual in this work.
Not just to give away the story, but as someone who's read that, that's not what happens.
I'm like hovering over Jacob's mute button here.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting though, like when you talk about how in real life the populations will tend to equalize towards the carrying capacity.
They don't always. Sometimes they do explode. You have, in the absence of wolves.
That's what to say. That's when you reintroduce wolves.
Yeah. Like that's what you see in these in that sort of cyclical population situation. It's essentially like the rabbits overshoot, and then they're brought down again, and then the wolves overshoot, eating the rabbits,
and then
they go down again, and it's always this sort of cyclical thing.
Yeah.
And even in terms of like one population where you have that sort of logistical curve, usually it doesn't like slow down and approach that limit so much as it'll overshoot it, collapse under it, overshoot, undershoot, and just kind of like gradually stabilize.
Yeah.
But what the thing that I think is most interesting, and you kind of touched on it, is that when we're talking about overshooting, the focus on animal populations versus the focus on human populations.
Yeah, because humans can make decisions, can think about their thought process far more than an animal can about
its consumption.
But like, when we're talking about like population dynamics and these sort of like equations and modeling of that, we're usually thinking about animals like rabbit populations, wolf populations, deer populations. But when we're talking about this overshoot, and we talk about Malthusianism, and we talk about like even the Wikipedia article about overshooting, even though as a concept of like population dynamics, we tend to think of animals, the idea of overshooting, just that word seems to be more human based. And so I think in the story, it's pretty clear that they're talking about like not even humans per se, but about like
systems,
ambitions, and
systems. I think is a good way to think of it.
But what I think is interesting is that if you think about it, like this idea that we had about flesh is cheap and dead flesh is cheaper, like maybe this is a situation where the population, irrespective of the Academy, has overshot its carrying capacity, and that's why
why flesh is cheap.
Flesh is cheap. There's just so much of it, and like you're more valuable dead than alive, because as alive you're just a drain on society. Again, going back to what all these thinkers in the 18th century were going on about.
Well, I think that's sorry.
Go ahead.
It's a extension we're talking about in. I think it was for Twig and not for Boyle, but about how this is also a commentary on labor and industrialization changing the dynamics of labor here.
Yeah.
In our world, factories putting a lot of people out of work. A lot of these cottage industries could not compete against the automated mills and automated weavers. And so, had to go work in essentially flesh is cheap and dead flesh is cheaper.
So Twig, it's mentioned the great unraveling of life or whatever.
Yeah.
Woolstone's discoveries was in 1821.
Yeah.
So 20 years after Thomas Malthus's essay, and actually I double checked before that logistic function I was talking about. So when you're talking about 1821, right in the middle of what it was our Industrial Revolution. Did I get the timeline?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thereabouts.
Industrial Revolution took a while. All these great upheavals in society, and suddenly life is upended, and we're now 100 years later into 1920. I guess their Industrial Revolution kind of got co-opted with this biotech stuff.
Yeah. We have historically, like Luddite movements who, we think of them as, anti-technology, but in reality, they were not necessarily anti-technology. They were destroying the technologies that were removing them from a job. They were more of a labor movement than some kind of radical anti-progress organization.
Did you guys talk about in one of your earlier episodes the Scott Westerfeld Leviathan books?
A little bit.
Yeah. Because I remember in that they had the monkey Luddites, who were those who were opposed to biological research, as a play on our world's Luddite movement. Yeah, opposed to biological research, displacing human life and devaluing it and stuff. So you could definitely see that same sort of thing probably playing out in Twig.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about Overshoot for in the world of Twig. I could definitely speak on it on how I interpret it for our world. Right now with climate change, we are so radically changing our atmosphere in ways that some of it we can't take back. It's one of those, once those changes happen, it's going to be very hard to reverse.
Yeah. I look out the window right now in Ottawa and the sky is filled with smoke.
Is it?
Yeah.
Let me reach over.
Yeah.
Let me see my window
the
here.
Air quality index for the forecast for today is terrible.
Not great. Yep. Guess we are not going to go for a walk today.
Just a couple weeks ago, most of big chunks of Quebec and Ontario were on fire. If you are in the eastern U.S., sorry, you might have noticed those fires. Yeah. And that's our Overshoot right there.
Tangible experience of it,
absolutely. It's I guess the light coming in is orange.
Can I go back to some earlier point I brought up of I'm just like I mentioned of how you've got Mary and Percy of these allusions to Frankenstein, but you guys Percy. Are talking about woolcraft.
Woolstone.
Woolstone. And Mary Shelley's mother was Woolstonecraft.
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me going all right, let's go and find the research for all these names, and then also what happened to these characters? Are there deliberate parallels that will happen? Percy Shelley died in a boating accident, and then Mary Shelley kept his calcified heart with him.
What?
If you want to know more about this, please go
watch
see
the plays.
Yes, Shelley and Lovelace never met. This is where pretty much all my information. I saw the play yesterday, so it is all fresh in my mind. Turns out that the best preparation for Twig wasn't even reading Twig. It was seeing that play, so I can add this little bit of tidbit onto it.
When was Frankenstein written? Because Twig,
it would have been around 1820s.
1820s.
We looked it up in our first episode, but I have promptly forgotten that date.
It said 1921, about a century after.
Yeah.
The whatever, and that was the time that
Frankenstein. So in Twig, is it that
1818,
rather than writing a book, Mary Shelley decided to
make it practical?
Make biotech stuff on her own.
It's not Mary Shelley; it's this Woolstone fellow.
But as Sophie was just saying, Mary Shelley's middle name is Wollstonecraft. Yeah.
So it's I don't know how we keep seeing this name Woolstone, but we don't really
No.
see enough to be able to say how
Yeah, it's just kind of
parallel.
like a little epigram, right?
Like, we don't know whether Woolstone is similar to Mary Shelley, except for name and time.
Well, I'm just saying, this entire story is about Woolstone's craft, which is the maiden name of Mary Shelley. So...
More puns.
One thing that seems to happen every time we come across Woolstone is talk about cats.
That is true.
It seems that cats are this universe's version of like lab rats. And every time Woolstone comes up, there's some sort of experimenting on cats.
She must have had a lot of cats.
So something to look out for is what was Mary Shelley's opinion on cats? But in this chapter, there are no cats. There's just the mention of...
there's a dog. But
well, there's the dog, but that's not part of...
Yeah.
It's actually a bunch of cats shoved into a dog frame.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's just talking about partial revival of the dead.
Yeah.
And that being one of the first
Stitched,
and most
right?
detailed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Presumably referring to Frankenstein's monster being the first project.
It's like, hey, I could actually do this.
Yes.
I'm still like on the deep dive of like people's backstories because Mary Shelley's other parent, William Godwin, was like a political philosopher known for utilitarianism and the first modern proponent of anarchism.
Huh.
So if we're going to read too much into things...
Do you know...
Definitely you should read too much into things because that's what we're here for.
Has the name Godwin come up? It sounds familiar as like one of the like Godwin's principles or something in the one of the chapters. Probably not. I might be
I don't know.
pulling elsewhere.
There's Godwin's law on the internet, but I don't think that applies here.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
No.
All right. Do we want to move on?
Yeah, did you have other big topics to cover?
Well, we have our character section, but we've talked a lot about Percy and what he's up to.
Yeah.
We did get his end game finally.
And I think it's stupid.
I agree with you. I get why Hale is like, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Well, Hale's reasoning, according to the text, is that it was too slow.
Yeah,
but like his end game is to mass produce clones and replace an entire generation with them, and then like Order 66 them.
There have to be more efficient ways of doing literally every step of that.
Yeah.
There is a part of me of like wondering if like the Lambridge orphans are meant to replace anyone. Like if that's just like supposed to be an Easter egg that like, okay, like they've been created for specific purposes, but like he was like creating his clones so he could just take the originals and just replace them like Cuckoo's Nest them.
Yeah.
You think he was trying to like replace the lambs with cloned lambs?
No, I think she's saying replace normal people or unmodified people with the lambs.
Because, because Percy mentioned that, I think it was the last chapter, that he was involved with the Lambs project when he was a student.
Oh, was he? Oh, he on the tangents, yeah. The periphery, yeah.
Like he was on the side, and that this was a thing that was happening. And
Well, Mary does have that like super, like unusually good abilities.
She has very good reflexes, right?
Yeah.
She's good at throwing knives.
It does seem like these clones that he's created are more capable than the people that they've replaced. So I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I agree. It did not strike me as a very smart project.
Yeah, like, I mean, even his first stuff with the bad seeds, right? It's like, all right, well, we have made these clones of different members of middle class and upper middle class society that we hope their parents will become rich in the future. We're going to raise them for several years, going to train them, how to be a person, how to be a very effective, superhuman killer and stuff. I'm going to spend all this money on cloning, on training, on this and that. So I'm going to infiltrate their families, take them out, and
then what?
And do what? He has kids who've, kind of infiltrated like the accountants of the crown, And even like his long-term plan, yeah, it just seems so
But not even infiltrated
convoluted.
the accountants. It's just infiltrated the accountants and killed one,
Yeah.
and then is like fired and forget. You know,
Yeah,
you don't have.
The note I made here is he's got like Percy has like big ideas, but they're not different ideas. Like he has one idea, clones, and he's just like, I'm gonna scale it up. I'm gonna make it bigger.
Everything
More
is clones. Never mind the fact that, like, what's he going to do with all of the kids that he's replaced with his
so I
sell them
think,
to the
Well, sell them, but, like, you know, now he's tanked the market with kids.
Oh no. I think the note I made about Percy, he really seemed interested in control. Like the thing that really appealed to him right at the end of the chapter is he would play God. So I don't even think there's like a plan. Like the plan in itself doesn't seem to matter to him. It's just the feeling of making life, of being in control, of having these clones. His Mary who looks up to him. These perfect idolizers.
It's essentially like,
weird dude.
I'm going to make clones anyway. Let's see if I can find a way to use them to.
Okay. All right. I was thinking, it keeps running through my head, is that comic panel that goes around the internet, like Spider-Man fighting this Pteranodon man, and the guy's like, I have turned myself into a dinosaur hybrid by rewriting, my cellular structure. And Spider-Man's like, what? But with that kind of technology, you could cure cancer. Well, I don't want to cure cancer. I want to make dinosaurs. That's what Percy's thinking. It's like, there's so much useful stuff you could do with mass-producing humans and life and stuff. He's like, yeah.
I mean, not a lot of them
clones,
very
and I'm going to wipe out a city. And I think, like, Sylvester keeps talking about expiration dates, and there's a note in the world building about the Indian Empire tried to make a whole class of
engineered slaves,
and then that didn't seem to work out for them because we don't hear about it anymore. So it's like, it had been a while since I read this chapter, and I was like, I didn't like Percy from the start because he's like, well, he's killing kids. He's kind of a jerk, but it's like, he's dumb.
And
he's
also his fashion choices are
very
terrible.
Clever, but very dumb.
And
I wonder what it says about this rebel movement that they're associating with the guy. He tells them, yeah, I have this idea for this new weapon system where we slowly infiltrate one family, and then we exponentially scale it up, and we replace a whole city with these.
Maybe in 400 years, all of the city could be ours.
And they're like, they don't immediately like, well, that's dumb or that's horrifying. They're just like, yeah, the Academy likes weapons. That sounds okay.
I'm assuming that they have a ton of these things going just in case one of them actually works out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming Percy is not their ace in the hole.
He's probably not even the dumbest one they have.
Yeah, he's like 3 of clubs.
The only other thing I had about Percy is that, like, he doesn't, the way he cares about his kids, like, he talks about how he cares about his own children.
He cares about Mary.
But, like, the way he cares about them is like the way a person cares about, like, their horse or, like,
a nice hammer.
Yeah,
it's like, it's not like love for a kid or a family. It's like, you are a tool that I am particularly fond of. Like, I had kind of the thought, like, of one of those slave owners you see in some stories, maybe probably in real life too, where they think of themselves as a good person because they're kind to their slaves. And it's like, I feel like that's kind of Percy's attitude towards these clones, where it's like, I love them and I care for them, but in the end, he still thinks of them as like possessions and tools.
Is it that he cares about his clones or just Mary? Like, do we even know what the boy clones were named?
Nope.
No.
We do not.
He never thinks about their names, them at all. He just seems to care about Mary.
He doesn't care about them as much as Mary. That's definitely.
I will very much laugh if he creates another clone and names it Claire. Because that was the name of Mary Shelley's sister, who also Percy Shelley had an affair with.
Oh,
that would be hilarious, and I definitely hope that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it feels like Percy is one of those, just going into the prediction supposition here. It feels like Percy's part in the story is largely done. At least vis-a-vis the lambs, maybe not for Mary. There's going to be presumably another interaction or two with Percy, but he is never going to be the antagonist again.
You don't think he's the main antagonist? I
definitely do not.
With how it's set up, I definitely think he's going to be in the background. He's now part of this larger movement.
Yeah, but
he doesn't feel like the end game.
There's the age. He's never going to have enough agency as a character again, I think.
Okay. He's definitely gone from being the guy at the top of the previous project to being the guy at the bottom in this new organization.
So I definitely I agree that he's not going to be the big bad, but I don't know if he'll never have agency again. Because we spent a lot of this arc basically recruiting Mary. We have this interlude going of okay, what's his deal? And yes, while there are other layers, I feel like characters having agency in Wildbow's works are always this important part of how you have all these different people, these side characters, what impact they have. And so I think that he has some bad seeds that still need to be sprouted.
He definitely still has a role in the story, but that role, I think, narratively is for Mary. It's going to be a Mary beat. It's not going to be a Percy beat. If that makes sense. Anyway, does anybody have anything else they want to say about anything else?
No, that's the end of the podcast. Cut.
I had one thing I wanted to say about the story in general and the world in general. So when I tried to sell friends on this story before, to little success, sadly, I was kind of I kind of pictured it as if all those classic early sci-fi stuff, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, I think The Isle of Dr. Moreau, all those mad scientists playing with the concept of life and horrible things happen. It's what if all those guys, rather than toiling away on their own and then getting wiped out by their hubris and their own inventions, what if they got hired by the British government and then institutionalized? That's kind of how I had seen the story from the start. But then I realized the comparison to mad scientists, they're not scientists, they're engineers. There's no research, it doesn't seem like curiosity about things. It's kind of we are building things to serve a purpose. We don't actually care about the broader philosophical or knowledge. We want a cooler weapon. We want a bigger dog. We want a stronger human. We want a bacteria that affects the rain, and we don't actually care what that does to the ecology of the area around.
Greater implications of it all.
Yeah, it's we want rain. And the academy, from what we've seen at this point, it's not really a university. There's professors and stuff, but there's no cutthroat, budget funding and grant proposals. I'm sure that's very interesting to someone deep in academia. But it's all this is focused on their bioweapons, on their biotechnology, on these new
production,
crazier weapons. Their whole Overshoot stuff. Yeah, this production. We talk of it. I mean, maybe that's just a storytelling thing, in that the lambs are focused on hunting down rogue weapons projects, their weapons projects. So we're not going to focus on the lambs investigating someone who's developed a slightly more efficient way of growing potatoes. But yeah, there's no interest in the public health, the agricultural side of biology, of building better biomaterials. We talk about these trees that grow the structure of the support the buildings, but the storytelling emphasis and all of the talk we've heard from the professors and the anti-academy and pro-academy side is all about bioweapons.
Also, I feel like the story gives me this very gothic, macabre vibe. It's not a really a sci-fi story where it's oh, here's what we could do with technology. It very much feels of we have created a monster and it is out of control, and that is the focus.
And the monster is science.
What you guys were saying about Woolstone kind of the name keeps popping up, but you don't get details. You don't really get details as to how any of this biotech stuff works. It's kind of it's magic with fleshy bits.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's to talk about another Wildbow work. It's Bonesaw as a fic or as a story.
Yes, Bonesaw, the biotinker.
The biotinker.
Worm.
It's
Which
again is still
it's magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's magic that uses bodies instead of.
I'm also interested in the Academy. Is like, if you talked about the Leviathan book by Scott Westerfeld, which has the whole competing empires, some biological, some technological.
World War One.
World War One, right? And this story takes place a little bit after what would have been our World War One.
Yeah, I think so.
1921. I don't know if did the World War happen.
Going
back to what we said about the Academy and the Crown needing an enemy, and Percy and their faction trying to be that enemy. Did the Crown? It rules a third of the world, right? The red ink on the globe.
Yeah.
There's an Indian empire mentioned. At this point in our history, Britain controlled India.
Yeah.
And
it also controlled India as an empire. So presumably I'm assuming that's part of their Crown holdings.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, because in 1920, India was solidly British and kind of divided up in like the princely territories, and it was not, they didn't conquer a full unified Indian subcontinent. So that's different. I wonder if they are an enemy of the Brits or the Crown. Sorry, we are assuming they're British.
We are, just based on that name.
And
I'm
the
size
still
of the
wondering.
empire.
So I studied electrical engineering, and I'm like, where's the electricity? I think they've mentioned like lighting and stuff, but it's like
it's all lightning.
It definitely feels like all the research, all the budget, all the development has been poured into the bioweapons, and they're just running on this steam.
Run on electricity. We know that for sure. They get like hooked up to the wiring system at night to recharge.
Oh.
And that's also why they can't go in water, because then they short circuit. Which again seems like such a poorly thought out system. We need rain everywhere, but our undead slaves can't be in water.
Yeah.
That's why they have all this like waterproof wax and stuff that everyone.
I see. Oh yeah,
I wonder if the electrical system is all like biological as well. Like you think of it as plugging them into the wall, but it's actually just like,
electric eels. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a giant electric eel in a vat somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll admit for the setting, I just sort of kind of saw it a little bit Victorian of like, it's just like, it's very much a follow through of what if Frankenstein became the de facto setting of the universe, that it's like, you don't just have one.
I am wondering why he said it in the 1920s and not in the Victorian area, which is the vibe we keep getting from the story. Because like the 1920s in our history is a time of huge progress, post-war, a big economic boom leading to a huge economic
I'm
bust.
assuming. Well, it's also the period or one of the periods of unchecked capitalism and labor abuses and all that. So that was kind of my reasoning. It's paralleling the fact that you have these elite at the top living lives of exploitation and just constant, as we talked about earlier, growth and consumption and growing unhappiness underneath. And then maybe at some point in this story that system collapses and we get an equivalent to the Depression.
Yeah. On the other hand, he might have just set the story 100 years after the divergence point, so he didn't have to worry about historical details. It's like, I don't have to get the names right. I can make stuff up.
Yeah.
All right. Do we want to speculate about the next arc titles called Cat Out of the Bag? So what do we think that means?
Well, clearly it's referring to experimenting on cats.
Yeah, you brought that up earlier. Yeah.
Well, I also feel like Cat Out of the Bag can mean like two things. One, it's like a secret has been out.
Revealed.
That it's like but it's also, I feel like, a loss of control. That it's just like something you had secret and tied up, and it's now out there in the world.
It could be an actual cat or cat monster, a cat snake again.
Yep.
Or any
That thing
secret
is-
that the Academy was trying to have that, like, you have to
Yeah.
deal with the repercussions.
Yeah, so what are... Yeah, cat out of the bag. I can't think of other good meanings there. What about the lambs themselves, who are our main characters? What's happening next for them, do we think?
I sort of get a Scooby-Doo gang from them in that, like,
Yeah.
they just have to, like, solve the next mystery. Like, yes, there's this overarching story of them, like, probably taking down the Academy by the end. But you'll probably get, like, oh, here, defeat this new monster,
Mhm.
and just try to integrate Mary.
Feels episodic in a way.
The monster of the week.
Kind of.
Type format.
Yeah.
Very literally.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And it's interesting also because I feel like Twig is the Wildbow work that would lend itself to some kind of stylized animation TV show really well.
I do think so. I
Something
think,
like Arcane or
yeah, the endlessly raining city with the
yeah.
blood red trees or blood red leaves growing up, and meat and fat and
Mm-hmm.
sparking corpses everywhere.
Yeah. Like it's very viscerally visual. You know,
Well, even using the art on the website for Twig,
yeah.
that style of art for the animation would be
Mhm.
really appropriate.
Yeah, it has a very interesting aesthetic
Yeah.
that would look very cool.
It would.
So, if you are listening to this podcast and you are a big budget Hollywood producer,
I remember
we can put you on the Discord. You
I
can
remember
talk to the author.
Wildbow at some point mentioned that some producers had approached him about doing a Twig TV show.
Oh,
I
really?
may be completely wrong, but then they wanted to change almost everything. They just kind of wanted,
Take that, you worm.
yeah. But yeah, I think it was like, you know, they wanted to age up all the characters, and I don't know. The way it was described reminded me a little bit of, I don't know if any of you have watched any of the old Stargate show, but there's in Stargate there's a show within a show where they're essentially doing Stargate within the setting.
You mean
And at some
episode
point,
200?
what?
Is that episode 200 you're talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But at some point, someone proposes, you know, that these characters are old. We need to like make, you know, new, young, cool characters, and that's kind of the vibe I got from these people wanting to make that Twig show. It just feels like there's an audience for this kind of work that doesn't need that kind of change or appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that brings us to the end of our food discussion.
I think so.
So now we generally do our discussion question, which last time was tell us an interesting, obscure, or niche mnemonic device that you know.
And Sophie, I really liked yours.
Yeah, so I think I just came up with this myself I needed to, like, study for a test on, like, what were the major, like, literary movements of, like, early Quebec literature. And I remember it by Ham, which is, like, it's either historical, adventure, or a morality tale. Is, like, the three major works that, like, you saw in, like, early Quebec
And in
literature.
Quebec, we eat a lot of ham.
Yeah.
Yeah, except you need to redefine it so that all the letters in jambon stand for something.
No thanks.
Jacob, did you come up with one?
I didn't come up with one of my own. I
That's
talked
fine.
about the symptoms of hypothermia, which are, you can remember them as your umbles, which are your stumbles, your fumbles, your mumbles, and your grumbles. So as your body temperature drops, I think the first one, you start losing your hand coordination, your fumbles, right? You can't hold on to things as well. The classic test they do is, I'm showing this on the video call, but the people listening to the podcast won't see this. If you can touch your thumb if you can't touch your thumb and pinky finger together, you will find as you get colder, you just can't close your hand like that anymore. That's a sign of a earlier middle stage hypothermia there. You're fumbling things, your hand coordination gets lost. your stumbles, you'll start losing your balance, your leg coordination, you start to trip. And your mumbles, you start talking like this, your kind of voice trails off, you start going off on strange tangents. I guess if you're a podcaster going through hypothermia, it might be hard to tell that you're going through it because you're already going off on tangents. People would be used to that. But yeah, you start to mumble, and then you start to grumble. You get short-tempered, irritable. You complain about the cold. You complain about where the walk you're on. You complain about your gloves not fitting right. And so if you see someone going through these symptoms, they're probably going through hypothermia. And it doesn't have to be below zero. This can happen on a bright summer day. If you get wet, if it's windy, you can get hypothermia, and it can be very dangerous. So keep that in mind.
Thank you.
There you
and
go.
then we
I feel like yours is slightly more useful than mine.
No, when I am out in the backwoods and I'm encountered by a bear, and I'm like, wait, I remember ham. Yeah. We can get a big discussion with the bear on the merits of Quebec literature.
We got a bunch from our listeners as well on the Reddit thread.
So Hobo Demon says that the Zodiac's origins as I cannot get that word right, as a mnemonic device are pretty wild to think about. Ancient humans eventually figured out how to use the stars as a calendar to time migratory patterns to harvest seasonally abundant resources. Various fruits ripening at a consistent time of year, annual fish spawns, hibernating megafauna becoming defenseless, etc. People made up stories about the patterns of stars because the stars themselves are pretty random, and people are better at remembering stories and are pretty decent at hallucinating order onto noise.
That's a good one. I like that. Yeah. Megafire brings up a mnemonic device that is niche by virtue of only applying to the Netherlands. The Netherlands has a chain of 5 islands called the Wadden Islands. It's an island chain that continues into Germany and even Denmark, but only 5 of them are Dutch. And you remember the names of them with the phrase TV Tas, which translates to TV bag, which is funny. And I'm not going to try and say the names of them because I don't know how to pronounce Dutch.
Do it.
All right, we've got Texel, Vlieland, Terscheling, Ameland, and Schiermonnikoog. That's my impeccable Dutch pronunciation.
Couldn't have done it better myself.
And RL Raider says that it's not an obscure or useful one, but from Matilda, Mrs. D, Mrs. I, Mrs. FFI, Mrs. C, Mrs. U, Mrs. LTY has lived in their brain for the past 25 years.
Is that just for remembering how to spell difficulty?
I believe so.
It's funny when the memory device sticks, but you don't remember what it's for. Like, someday now I'll be thinking, ham!
It's like, why?
And I don't know what that's for.
Yeah.
Did you have a mnemonic device, Tommy?
I was trying to think of them, but no, I can't think of one offhand.
One that I came up with, it's not really a mnemonic in that it's not so much to remember things, but to be able to figure stuff out, is the fact that if you're trying to convert between kilometers and miles, the ratio is very close to the golden ratio. So you could actually use Fibonacci numbers, which are also close to the golden ratio, to convert between miles and kilometers. So
interesting.
You could be like, 2 miles is 3 kilometers, 3 miles is 5 kilometers, 5 miles is 8 kilometers, 8 miles is 13 kilometers, and so forth.
This is very relevant for Canadians.
Yes.
For the rest of the world, it might not matter.
It's still relevant to Americans if they want to convert from kilometers to miles. You just do the
they should really
opposite.
just convert from miles to kilometers and keep it that way, but I digress.
But, the fact that we're using one of Wollstone's ratios in order to transform
to miles
is relevant as well.
The road's a monster.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't have a new discussion question planned, but we should.
We should.
So let's real quick, Jacob, Sophie, any suggestions or thoughts for a discussion question for our audience this coming episode?
Does it have to be relevant to Twig?
No.
It could be like a mnemonic thing.
Yeah, or at least I was just thinking about how a lot of Twig is fighting against the system. Like, you've got this established academy, so just what are their favorite stories that are about overthrowing the system and whatever way that means.
Yeah, I'm
That
down
works.
for that. Like we've had some questions in the past that were like, tell us your favorite story that involves such and such a
Clones
thing that
or-
happened in the story.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
very on brand.
It's also good as a conclusion to an arc type of question. So
I love it.
That's
I like
a
it.
lot better than my question. I was going to ask, what's your favorite whale facts? Because I like whales. If you know a story about whale revolution and you can tie that to Sophie's one, bonus points.
Perfect.
Clearly, at
Perfect.
some future time, I should just ask people their favorite puns because we did spend a lot of time just examining wordplay. So
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Speaking of whales, did you know that orcapods in, I think, Seattle have fashion? As in, they will carry a dead salmon as a hat.
Mm-hmm.
And that is
Okay.
it's spread mimetically through orcapods.
Well, I don't think we're going to be seeing that at Paris Fashion Week anytime soon. It's a bit avant-garde. Oh, but
yeah.
there is a whale revolution story. There is one in the news recently. We've been hearing the reports of orcapods in the Atlantic
Attacking
damaging
boats.
ship rudders after a whale was struck, an orca was struck by a rudder. Now that the pods have communicated and figured out that they can damage ships by going for the rudders. And so we are currently in the middle of a whale uprising.
Yeah, wasn't the Dutch racing team attacked recently? And a Scottish trawler.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whale revolution. There we go.
There we go. All right, well, you've already answered my question. I'm happy for that.
I love this.
All right.
Do we want to do the outro and then plugs, or do we want to do plugs and then outros? Or
let's do plugs first. And
right.
Plug anything that you're interested in or involved in, or a project that you're launching, or something. Just something you want to recommend.
Thanks for being part of this podcast. It's really fun having you guys around.
It has.
All right.
It was a lot of fun being here. Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Sophie. Thank you for having me on. One thing that I am currently involved in is the Ink Fort Publishing Derby. It's this event where you have 100 different writers, and you have assigned pre-made fantasy covers. So you've got the book cover and the title and a pen name, and everyone gets assigned one after ranking them. And you have to write a minimum of 10,000 words matching the cover you get assigned. And that will all be released end of September. And there's this competition. So I cannot tell you which story I'm writing because that's against the rules of the competition. But I can say, I can just advertise of check out the Ink Fort Publishing Derby.
That sounds really cool.
That
is a really cool
event.
sounding. So you're literally judging the story by the cover here.
Yeah, pretty much. You're writing a story by the cover. You get assigned the cover, and you have to write a minimum of 10,000 words. There is no maximum.
Cool. That does sound really interesting.
Is this a local thing or an online thing?
It's an online thing.
Okay.
I'll send you a link, and you can link it up at the end of the podcast if you want.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
Perfect. Jacob, do you have anything to plug?
I don't have any art projects of my own to work on, unless you want to come see the concert band that I'm in.
That's definitely something. People fly to Ottawa to.
Yeah, I don't know if I want the podcasters of the world coming down and descending upon the concert band and picking through us like locusts. That's a terrifying image.
Fair enough.
Our listeners are very nice people.
Mm-hmm. But if you're looking for something else to read, I have to recommend one of my favorite stories right now is this webcomic called Unsounded, written by... It's been going on for about a decade by this woman down in Florida. It's this whole fantasy epic with lots of revolution and murder and intrigue and very interesting magic, because everything is... Humans are living in the fading remnants of the second world, which is built upon literally the bones of the first world. The mountains are made out of the corpses of the first world's mountain ogres. And there is one of our two main characters, kind of like Twig, is a Stitched, I guess, their world's equivalent of a Stitch. She is a reanimated corpse who is the only one, it seems, who can actually think. And he still wants to eat people very much, but he still has a little bit of sanity and consciousness, and he's this strange mage who's being tasked to escort our other main character, a very annoying 10-year-old with a tail, who is kind of, you could compare it to Sylvester in Twig, this snarky, improvising, seat of their pants troublemaker. A lot of fun. Go
that
check
does
it
sound
out.
interesting. Is Unsounded by Ashley Cope?
Yep, it's online. She publishes 3 pages a week. Big
Cool.
full color, very detailed art, great world building, lots of very, very heavy violence. If that grosses you out, seeing guts on the screen, do not read it. But a lot of similar stuff with Twig. I'd say a lot of that in the terms of the different revolutionary factions and different how the exploitation of children being used for war weapons and child soldiers and stuff. It's a cool read.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
I thought I had read it, but if it's still updating nowadays, then I clearly
it just
haven't read
updates
all of it.
slowly, so you might have read it a while ago.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check it again and see what I've missed. It's very good. I can second that recommendation.
Cool. All right, so let's head into our outro. So everybody, really appreciate you all for listening. Hope you'll continue along with us as we keep going into our second arc of Twig. You can read along with us at twigserial.wordpress.com. And if you do, and even if you don't, please go to Wildbow's Patreon at www.patreon.com/Wildbow and support him.
That's 3 W's.
That is 3 W's, correct. Wildbow only has 2, though. And support him. It's how he can produce all these great stories and settings. Please leave your answers to our discussion question in our Reddit thread or on our Doof Discord thread.
Yeah, so you can reach us at totwigpodcast@gmail.com, totwigpodcast on Twitter, as long as Twitter survives as a platform, our Reddit thread in r/parahumans, as long as Reddit survives as a platform. You know that Spez has explicitly confirmed he's taking following Musk's example in how to run a company, eh?
I had not heard that, but lovely.
It's not surprising.
It's not.
And we'll have our discussion thread in the Doof Discord. Thanks again to them for letting us continue squatting in their Discord server. And our next episode will be covering Cat Out of the Bag 2.1 and 2.2.
Right, and this time we have a biology and also a punk fact. The punk fact first, Dante, do you want to share it since you shared it?
Yeah, so the original definition of the word punk from the 1500s, it meant a prostitute. You'll see it in some of Shakespeare's plays with that meaning. In the early 20th century, it came to mean homosexual, and then a kid, and then a young criminal, just kind of all over the place, the meaning of words, talking about words having multiple meanings. In May of 1971, the magazine Cream started using the term punk rock to describe the fast, violent music and the fashion that came with it. So, yeah, really quite a long history. And then, of course, now we have literature, biopunk, steampunk,
Spiderpunk,
taking its meaning from that. So, yeah,
that's cool.
That's my fact.
Cool. And our biology fact is, we all know and remember from school, the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, is an organelle inside almost every cell. It has its own separate DNA, though, which gets passed down to you matrilineally. So your mother's DNA, your mother's mitochondria, and then she gets it from her mother's, et cetera, et cetera. Long-term changes in mitochondrial DNA let scientists track human population history, because if 2 people have similar mitochondria, they share a relatively recent great-grandmother. But what's also interesting on the concept of the matrilineal line is that, people have children within if you have children, it's within a certain period of one's lives. So it's safe to assume that 4 women in your matrilineal line are born every 100 years. So in 1,000 years, that's only 40 women. So it basically means that since the advent of agriculture 9,500 BC or so ago, was only 450 mothers in the past.
Woo.
That's wild.
Which is a tiny number of mothers.
Shout out to moms.
Yeah. On the subject of
moms?
No, on the subject of mitochondria. We talked, was it last episode, about how, well, yes, also on the subject of moms, we talked about how placentas came to be because they were a virus that was absorbed into the functionality of the host organism and then just came to be part of the regular reproductive system. And mitochondria originated in much the same way. This was a lot further back when organisms were single-celled, and one organism engulfed another one, and they sort of ended up in this sort of symbiotic relationship, and now all of the cells come with the mitochondria organism as part of it. So
yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So many interesting things about these random stuff. You like look up biology facts, and then it's just like a whole rabbit hole of stuff.
And just how much of life as it works is just accidents all along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, speak for yourself.
Yes, Jacob here is the pinnacle, the culmination, the purpose.
You said it, not me.
All right, everybody. Thank you again for coming on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate you guys coming on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having
and
us.
a lot of really insightful stuff.
It was
We'll
good.
talk to you next time.
Yep.
Yeah.
See y'all.
Bye.